Peace.
Peace.
All right, this is the Ash Your Old Head podcast with Justice Raji. I'm here with my guest, Michael Alexander. Peace, Michael.
Peace. Thank you for having me.
Welcome. Thank you for being here. I always like to start the show with giving you a chance just to give some reverence or respect to somebody that's important to you. So,
you know, I always think about the first gift that I was given, and the first gift that I was given were my parents.
Right.
I had the benefit of two people who were very different in their life, but who had given my brothers and I unconditional love. And it's rarely that I face any kind of a challenge where I don't get drawn back to them to get grounded before I sort of step out.
Okay. All right. Peace. Thank you.
So I honor them.
Indeed. All right. So, first question is, can you share just a standard or principle that you apply to your life that you think is really important about how you live as a man?
There's a constant reminder that I give myself, and it's been that way for decades, and that is to listen deeply to other people so that I have a sense of their truth. I know what my truth is. I approach each day with a set of guidelines around those things that I consider important and that hold particular meaning to me. But I know that those things came over time, and they came in some instances over struggle or over gifts, or there are a lot of ways in which I've developed that. And I want to make sure that I pay attention to the path that other people have navigated to find their truth, because it will differ from mine. And I'm not concerned about understanding it as much as I am concerned about being clear that that journey that they were on is unique to them. Mm-hmm. And it defines them in unique ways, in the way that my journey has defined me. So I really listen deeply to try to get a sense of other people's truths, not only the what, but the why.
When with that experience or that practice, is there a way that you would characterize or maybe instruct someone to how they could practice that or sort of build up that skill of being able to be listening and be present?
That's a great question. I think what helps me to stay focused on it is that I have come to that insight through people being willing to let me grow in my knowledge and understanding of the world and the world that we navigate through. And not only grow in it, but who have forgiven me for time that I have spent believing things or embracing things that were neither true nor productive. I have such reverence and gratitude to my gay friends who have looked past my homophobia at earlier points in my life, the biases and the bigotry that I held. I'm so thankful to my Native American friends who have forgiven me for the time that I spent as a child playing cowboys and Indians and hating to be an Indian. And, and that was true for me. I mean, that was something that I found to be totally acceptable without any understanding or any sense of the impact that it had on the humanity of other people. And they have given me the time and the understanding to move past that. And so when I find myself needing to listen to somebody else's truth, I go back to those kinds of passages for me where somebody has given me that safe space to go into and grow from. And then I believe it's my obligation to do the same thing.
Wow. That's peace. Yeah, I think for me, learning to recognize where you've made error, and then to, and it's, I guess I would say it's very present moment right now for me at my home. But when you made error and you want to acknowledge, that you've made error, but also we're still we're gonna be together. Still, we're also gonna be here.
Yeah.
As a community, as individuals, whatever. And I think sometimes on a macro level, as our society, we don't do the best with wherever the temperature's at in terms of when someone violates what's the current social norm. Right now we're in a very run them out culture, right? And sometimes there's a small, you can't come speak at the front of the table at the cookout, but you don't necessarily got to go home. For me at least, you know what I mean? You just can't talk right now. You just go get the plate and sit over there by the oak tree and be mellow and hope grandma don't say nothing to you.
That's right. That's the role you need to play right now.
Yeah, and I think, but I guess as a person that is sometimes present for others, you start to see okay, I need to just sit and listen to what's happening here, and maybe my first reaction isn't the right one. The read isn't the right one. How is that ability? I mean, I guess as you've developed that, how has that served you in the things that you do or the places that you find yourself?
Well, I find that it does a number of things. First of all, it constantly gives me a reminder that I need to approach these situations with a sense of humility. My truth or my understanding, I understand, is only as deep and as broad and as supported by the experience that I have. And my experiences are limited. My knowledge base is limited. I look at those things that are inherently a part of what I know and understand, and then I look at everything else that's been a gift from somebody else who has been willing to spend the time with me or share the insight with me or take me along a knowledge path. And, I learned a long time ago, I don't know enough to take care of me. I truly don't, and that's why I've been so fortunate to have the family I have, to have the children I have, the friends and the people whose path is intersected with mine. And I try to harvest those gifts. But sometimes when you find yourself really challenged, I remind myself that I can put my beliefs someplace on a shelf and know that they're safe, and now listen to somebody else. And suspend judgment while I'm listening. I'm not listening for the sense of what's right, what's wrong, what I agree with, what I disagree with. I'm listening to deepen my understanding and suspending judgment. The judgment will click in at the time that I need to find a way to merge these two or to displace something that I hold, or quite frankly, to counter something that I've heard. And that's a necessary interaction. But it doesn't have to be the point of engagement. There has to be a point where you are simply there to gather data. A scientist gathers data, and then they begin to look at what are the applications, how do I unpack this, what do I do with it? And I find that, quite often in situations where there are divergent viewpoints, too often we approach it looking to find the weak point, the seam, the break, the point of disruption, as opposed to understanding what's being presented to us and then going back to see how does this align, misalign with my own set of beliefs or constants on this. And that's, and don't get me wrong, I struggle with this. This is not anything I've mastered, but it's the way that I want to approach the navigating through difficult and challenging situations, particularly with an understanding that I never come into it with everything that I need in order to come to the outcomes that I need to come to. I'm going to have to grow in my knowledge. I'm going to have to validate some things. I'm going to have to acquire some new perspectives. Can't happen if you're not listening, and it won't take hold if you're constantly in a state of validating or invalidating based on what it is you presume to be right. So I really work hard at suspending judgment knowing that it doesn't take away from anything that I hold true. I can re-engage those at the proper point, but I want to be a sponge.
Thank you. So the second question, relationships broadly defined. Is there something that you could share that you understand better now that maybe at whatever points in your life you maybe didn't understand so well?
I first of all, I think I understand that relationships are organic. They need to be nurtured. There's a care and feeding, and those that are cared for and fed will grow and evolve and develop, and those that are not will wither. It's the opportunity to sort of be with people in an authentic way that warrants the investment of your time and energy in supporting them. And I really value, I enjoy relationships. I mean, I really do. It takes my life out of either the preordained or the accepted path that I'm on. And I get to envision or engage people and things, ideas, concepts, in a very different way than I would ever be able to do on my own. And, I view people's willingness to sort of bring you into that space as a gift. And I think it needs to be treated that way. I also understand that, relationships can be the source of significant discomfort, because if they are authentic relationships, there are things that will happen that are anticipated, and there are things that will happen that are not anticipated. I mean, there's sometimes just collateral damage of being in a space, a common space that you're sharing with somebody in a real deep and authentic way. Mm-hmm. You don't engage when it's comfortable and disengage when it becomes problematic. I mean, that is all a part of it. Mm-hmm. So in some ways, it helps me to sort of strengthen my base of humanity when I can be in good and authentic relationships. And when I have, the opportunity to sort of, bring people into my world and my existence, who otherwise, might not have felt very comfortable sort of trying to find their way in on their own. Mm-hmm. We live in crazy times now. I mean, I think, we're involved in a civil war, but we're using words instead of bullets right now. Mm. But, even during other times, I think it's very difficult sometimes for folks whose tribes are different to find those points of overlap or intersection without some type of indication that there's a willingness or an invitation to have folks sort of come on in and be a part of that. Mm.
Could you give maybe just insight on methods or ways that you try to open up a little bit to give someone the space or to invite someone in, like to maybe make a deeper connection? Is there any, not that I want you to spill all of your methodologies in a way that would undermine, or people would maybe not like in a I would to the listeners, I would not want you to take this as a like, this is the Machiavellian, even though our usage of that is usually wrong, means by which you manipulate people. More of the something I do or think about sometimes, or I've done in the past, that has helped me to make a space for someone.
Well, one of the things that I've always tried to do, and some of this goes back to just who my parents were, but wherever I've worked, because the workplace is an odd phenomenon. It's the one place that many people will be around other folks who are very dissimilar, not like them. We don't choose who's going to be there. Yeah. And we tend to find our swim lanes to navigate in and out of it without having to, get into, bumping into or tripping over or being in space or hearing things that just rile you. You say, that ain't who I am, so let me find a way to sort of exist here, to get in of it, get in there, get out of it, without having to worry about my view of the world being challenged or disrupted. Mm-hmm. So it's why there's so much focus around equity and diversity. Because when we go back to our four walls in our house, we can do anything we want to do. I mean, we create that world. We create that space. Things come in it or they don't based on our own sense of self, personal preference, bias, whatever it might be. Whenever I've worked someplace, I've always asked myself, who is it around here who is made to feel invisible? Because of status or roles or just the ability to sort of segment ourselves towards some things and away from others. And I've always taken great pride in never going into a space and traveling through it in a way that anybody would feel invisible. And so, an example, I always knew the names of the people who were in housekeeping. And then folks would pass them all day long, and somebody might be cleaning out the lobby, and I would want to say not only say good morning, but find out who their names. Let's talk a little bit about how your weekend was. The same thing that I would say to the receptionist who met me on my way into my job interview upstairs, in terms of small talk and yes, acknowledging their humanity. And I would want to make sure that I did that with people who, during the course of the day, folks would just pass by them without any sense of acknowledgement that they existed. My father cleaned bathrooms for the New York City Transit Authority when he migrated here from the West Indies. He did that and continued, and by the time he finished, he was the guy who was routing trains through the system. So he was a tower man, but it took years to get to that point. But he began, doing very humble work. And, as far as I was concerned, the man who was cleaning that toilet was just as noble and just as worthy of recognition as the person who was routing the number 8 train up through Pelham. And my mother cleaned houses. But she was a creative soul, a sensitive soul, a loving soul. And whenever, my friends would come over and visit, they would spend more time talking to my parents than talking to me. So, I think about things like that and just say, are there people who are responsible for enriching lives who we're passing every day as if they don't exist? So when I think about relationships, it's how do we find ways to acknowledge our humanity and know that there's not an excise tax that's applied to that, based on your status or whether you're wearing a tie or a pair of work boots. And every once in a while, I will be traveling, I'll be downtown or something, and one of the folks who I've sort of cultivated a relationship with will see me and just kind of come up and say how much they miss seeing me in and out of that space every day. And I have to acknowledge that I miss seeing them as well.
Yeah, that's beautiful. I think definitely a choice, or who the economy of engagement, like who we decide to make the time or the space, in our consideration of like, okay, can I stop for a minute and ask this person a question or say how they're doing, and even the assumption that when you ask someone else, well, how was your weekend, that you really don't care, and it's like, no, I really care, and even something I had started doing years ago when people would ask me is those kind of questions, which sometimes has had interesting reactions because when I answer those honestly, people kind of go like, "Oh, I wasn't expecting you to." I was expecting you to say, "Great," I go like, "Well, it's rough. It was kind of a rough weekend for me." And they're like, "What you mean?" Oh, like just I'm not really ready to talk about that. I'm like, and not that I was going to ask them to talk about it more, but in the effort to try to be present, and honest about
and
what's happening, and then, I guess I would say my long thread thinking on that is like if we're trying to be in community or in a village mind state about how we interact with each other, I should really tell you how I'm feeling. It doesn't necessarily require you to do some other next step, but if maybe we start being honest more often about how we're feeling or what we're doing or what we're thinking. When appropriate, maybe we'll get some different outcomes. This is my hypothesis.
And I think it gives us the opportunity to truly be of support to folks, because some of those discussions weren't just, oh, no, I had a great weekend. It's, my partner is sick and this is a real difficult time, or, I lost somebody, and it gives you the opportunity to sort of come back to them and to ask them about the things that are most pressing in their lives, and to be an acknowledgement that, they're going through a difficult time. I never forget, I worked both times when my parents passed away. I was, working at jobs, and I remember that some of the folks who were the most supportive and the most caring, were the people who, the guard I passed in on the way, and he would say, well, how's your dad doing? I said, well, he's really not doing that well. I appreciated being able to sort of just be nurtured and supported by someone who had a genuine sense of concern about how I was doing. Mm-hmm. And for me to have the opportunity to do that for somebody else, I felt, was not only time well spent, but, really a way of acknowledging that long before we put on these uniforms, we were placed there by the Creator to support and be nurturing to one another. And that, this is the opportunity to sort of continue to get grounded to that. So I do think and the other piece, I have to chuckle. My first, when I first got out of graduate school, I worked in a mental health center for 7 years. And this was with folks who had been discharged from the state hospital, one of the large state hospitals in Pennsylvania, during a time when they were moving people out of hospital and community-based living arrangements and other settings. And when you walked into the day program and asked somebody how they were doing, they were going to tell you. It wasn't, it's like, well, my medication isn't working, and my landlady took this, and they won't let me have, I've ordered 2 cups of coffee this morning, and I can't smoke. And
right.
So if you didn't want to know how they're doing, you just said good morning. But I said, they deserve to sort of have that hearing.
They deserve to have that window to share.
Yeah. That Chuck Ivory.
That's it. Oh man, yeah, you never know. Yeah, that's a good thing about asking questions. You never know where it's going to take you.
That's exactly right.
So, for you right now, what's just really important to you right now?
We live in a city that is a very a dynamic time in a very rapidly evolving environment within Portland, and lots of difficult discussions, and a couple of things that are important to me now, and I don't know if it's just a sign of having been around for a while. I get teased about being an elder, and I don't feel any different than I did when I was 25. But I'm not 25 anymore. But and I take it with honor and grace. But having seen so much, I am concerned that we miss opportunities for dialogue in exchange for debate. We are debating a lot. And if there's a way to sort of move the pieces on the chessboard so that it's not a battlefield as much as a safe place to come and talk through difficult issues without the sense that the only outcome has to be there's a winner and there's a loser. Mm-hmm. I hope, that at some point dialogue we can tilt the scale towards dialogue and away from debate, because I believe there are very few pure truths in life. There just aren't any. I mean, there are blends, they shift, and again, I think the idea that we can have parallel truths that are a part of difficult scenarios means that dialogue becomes much more important than the loudest voice in the room. because the wisest voice in the room may be the quietest voice in the room. And if we can find the way to sort of weave dialogue into our problem solving, then I think it puts us in a position where we can bring our best to that. The other kind of focus that I think I try to bring, and that's important to me, is that as we look at some of the challenges and some of the struggles that we face as a community, as parents, as people concerned about our children and other people's children, and the impact that some of the systems that serve us have on us, I want to be able to always sort out the difference between intent and impact. Because we live in a world of impact. And it's very difficult to sort of argue that. We look at, the healthcare measures, and we look at the determinants of health, and we look at the indicators, the predictions that our zip codes determine not only our life expectancy, but the safety in our lives, our earning capacity. I mean, impacts are immutable. Intent, though, varies. And I think, for me, I've always wanted to know when I find myself being impacted by the work of an individual, of a system, of a policy, that I step back to determine what the intent was. And quite often, the intent may well have been something that was not directed towards creating this particular outcome. This was this collateral damage. And I think that the point of trying to redress that is very different than if the intentionality was to make sure that you were denied access or that you were on the outside of what would be considered a normal set of outcomes. And, it all feels the same, but it starts at different places, and it demands different things of us. I don't mind having discussions with decision makers or key influence or policy makers in a situation where the intent was not directed towards the impact. But while they understand that they may not be the cause of this, they are responsible for addressing it. How do we now come back and say, okay, we can talk, because the reality is I don't like what happened and you didn't intend for that to happen. We now need to figure out how do we restructure, realign, or use those insights. For folks who are, for people who clearly knew that there was a high likelihood, if not a desirable outcome, of this decision or policies or practices or behaviors that were going to have a deleterious impact on particular folks, and they were very comfortable with that going into it. That's a whole different discussion, and I don't want to take the wrong strategy to the wrong body, and so I'm always trying to figure out, if I want to look at intent, I want to look at impact, and I want to be clear as to what the driving force was towards that. And, that takes, it takes, again, that suspending judgment and sort of listening without having to worry about, when I reach for, my particular set of tools or quite frankly, weapons. I mean, strategic weapons that I would use. But also, I want to, find out where I have the opportunity to help to move somebody's thinking or understanding from a place where those unintended consequences could be a high likelihood to one where they're likely not to be the outcome because they're much more conscious of that. Now, it means you have to have people who are willing to listen. It means people who are willing to be engaged in dialogue versus debate. And folks who are looking to create, again, I talk about these safe spaces where you can have difficult discussions as opposed to battlefields where you're looking to figure out, you bring a gun, I bring a rifle. You bring a rifle, I bring a howitzer. That sounds too Trumpian to me, quite frankly. And I think that I think that the outcomes warrant the additional time and attention that it takes to approach things that way.
I think so. I've always, and this is one of my, I guess, youthful thoughts, like when I would first, like, you watch the news or something with your parents and, like, you don't totally know what's going on, but you're sort of like, oh, okay, all right, that's not. But, the overriding idea that there should be some sort of answer to something that we're trying to do that's like an answer, like that's based on the merits of the problem.
Yeah.
Not necessarily around, the political philosophy or, economic vision, or economic, practice model or whatever. But it seems like there's a lot of things we should be able to go, well, we need this, or these folks need that.
Right.
What are the linkages? And then,
right.
But how do you get persons who either are wrapped in a model? How do you tweak them to get them, like, to make them feel comfortable enough to, like, this may or may not affect your model, but here's, like, how we can talk about it. Those sorts of things. I look forward, hopefully, to the day when we can have I think that's a good framing there in terms of a discussion about, all right, we need better access to hospitals in this part of town. What's the obstacles? Why isn't there a hospital?
Right.
What's
right.
And not, well, everybody doesn't need hospitals because you can do this, or, like, somebody's like goes on this other, like, I'm into this type of healing, right? Like, no, whoa,
yeah,
I didn't want. I don't want to, So, when those type of, what are some things that you've, I guess, either learned or experienced in trying to, like, move a debate closer to a discussion? Like, what are some things you've tried to do to get that to happen?
That's a very insightful observation. And what happens, quite frankly, for me, when we, you sort of can sort of present a premise, and then depending on, again, philosophical bent, the perspective, filters that people will bring to it, you'll find it sort of just moving and shaking and growing and leaning back and forth and sort of going beyond the intended exercise. What is it we're trying to do? I always, think at some point, is it appropriate to say, okay, let's slow down for 1 second and remind me again of what problem we're trying to solve. I mean, because there could be a bunch of them. I mean, when people begin to sort of bring a perspective, it can shift us away from the original intent to an equally compelling, set of circumstances or criteria, but it's not the problem that we came to begin to solve. And I think if we're not solving the right problem, then let's shift to the one that is. But can we stay at least on a singular path? Because otherwise you're arguing the merits of which priority is the most compelling. Mm-hmm. And that's a losing battle. I can't, if your boot is on my neck, that's the most compelling problem to me.
Right.
Now,
I if somebody, this boots, figure it out.
And if somebody else is saying, well, but such, this and that is happening at the same time. Well, the reality is, we may be able to solve your problem and mine, but we're not being able to do it at the same time because we're not going to be focused on what it is that we're trying to do. And so I'm always kind of remind myself of the value of, being very clear as to what it is we're trying to address. And then also understanding that when there is a portfolio, of compelling issues, problems, that, we also need to be comfortable sequencing them. Everything doesn't cross the line at the same time, and it doesn't take away from something to say that, I think we're going to need to approach this for this reason, and then this will open up an additional pathway for us to now broaden this to engage something else. And understand that sometimes you sequence it based on prioritization. Sometimes you sequence it based on timing. Mm-hmm. You can ask me, what the weather is going to be a week from today. And I have some indications I might be able to forecast it. But the best answer I can give you a week from today. Not today. So the fact that I may be able to put something out, but can we give ourselves a better, factual, perceptual, philosophical foothold by sort of saying, let's answer next week's question next week. Mm-hmm. And that's not a put off anything, but you can have the sense that I'm going to respond when asked about whatever, whenever. But the reality is I may not be in the best position to do that right now. Right. And I want to allow myself the opportunity to offer it at a time that it's going to be most meaningful, most impactful, and quite frankly, lets me gather additional data and input during a time that's going to be available to me.
Mm. Yeah, I think the sort of the injection or putting into a situation that there needs to be like a time and a season to what we're working on, and it's something I think is if I was putting on I guess I don't know if it's anthropology or sociology hat, kind of like a trait I think in our community is that and that being African American
anthropological,
is that at certain times, as much as that's important to talk about, we're not going to talk about that right now. And you just can't ask us that right now. And, you might have to wait 48 hours. You might have to wait 48 weeks before we can talk about that. And, and I think it is a struggle at times, sometimes in community and our community, because folks are like, but this is pressing. And then it's like, but like that opens up there's other things going on that are more immediate in the hearts of what people are thinking, and we're just going to have to wait.
And that's a dynamic that I think leaders will constantly have to figure out how they address. These are, in some ways, the challenges that face us within community or face us as people, as parents. They're all equal, but there are the greater and lesser of equals. And when you begin to look at, how do we prioritize and how do we begin to problem solve, if there's not a logical sequence or rationale to that, then you find yourself trying to boil the ocean. Mm-hmm. And, the effort will absolutely be there, but the outcome won't. And that's where I think we begin to say to ourselves that every once in a while you have to make Sophie's choice in some of these difficult situations. And that's not comfortable, it's not comforting, but it allows you to at least begin to say, I can see a path, and, the first step doesn't get us as far as the second, third, fourth, or fifth will. But if we don't find a way to begin to sequence that, we will be where we are. A year from now, we'll be standing here paralyzed, trying to figure out how do we go north, east, south, and west at the same time.
Yeah, it's tough.
It's
heavy.
It is.
It's a heavy thought.
And it's but hopefully it will force us to do our best thinking. Yeah. Because otherwise we are absolutely paralyzed.
All right. So I wanted to make us have a pivot.
I'm following you, my brother. I'm following you.
Start to wind this down a little bit because I don't want to take too much time on a Saturday. I know you're a busy man. I know you officially, these are air quotes, retired. However, it still could be, what can you? So probably two questions. It'll be this one and then one. Just talk a little music before we pull the real, jump out. In the time that I've known you, you've always had a calm. I don't know if it's always been that way, and maybe I only see you when you're calm. But in terms of the way you manage space and situations in terms of like stress level or at least your stress reaction. Is there any secret sauce to how you try to approach to like manage just your sort of like your methodology or your method in the way you engage with people?
No, I think I've been asked that a couple of times, and I don't know to what do I attribute it. I think a part of it is that I have two brothers, one who's a year younger, one who's 10 years older, and they are in very much the same way. I mean, we have sort of the same mannerisms, and I think a part of it is, particularly for my younger brother and I, is that we were the children of a mature man. I mean, my father was almost 50 years old when I was born. Uh-huh. And so, and I tell people all the time that I never heard my father curse. I never saw my father drunk, and my father never struck my mother. And now, it's not that there was a contest or anything on it, and the other thing I'd say, my father was a man's man. There was nothing sort of small about him. I mean, he lived with a type of dignity, and he used to tell us, you may never be the smartest person in the room, you may never be the biggest person in the room, you'll never be the tallest, the richest, but you can always have the most class. Mm. And he always told that. And I look at my older brother, my model, my younger brother, and they are just good men. And so I think in some ways the definition of manhood in my house was kind of modeled by my dad. And, I've never had a hard time taking it with me. I mean, it's, my staff will tell you every once in a while when I used to have to give a speech or something, and I'm not uncomfortable talking publicly, but I get a little nervous. Mm-hmm. I just write my parents' initials on the palm of my hands. Mm-hmm. So whatever I looked at, EJA, EGA, they're right there in the palm of my hands. And it just brings me back. It centers me. It's these are the people, this gift that I had, this wonderful gift that we had coming up, unconditional love. We grew up, and you and I talked about growing up East Coast. I grew up in the hood. I mean, it was Bedford-Stuyvesant. I tell people all the time, I'm a corner brother. I'm a corner brother who God has been just unbelievably generous to in terms of where my life has taken me. And I guess on most days, Justice, I honestly just feel that, I am so fortunate that if I have the opportunity to be in a room and contribute to somebody's quality of life or put fingerprints on something in a positive way, that, that's the way that my gifts are supposed to be spent. And I just, then the corner brother part of me says, there's only a couple things to get excited about. As long as you're not hurting my family, or trying to hurt me, then I just need to bring whatever calm I can and sort of be present.
Yeah, all right. That's sweet. I think I like that. That's the best way to think about it.
Feel free to use it.
Oh, I will. Ooh, so on music, I've approached this part of the interviews different ways with different people. So I'm going to try something new today.
Okay.
I guess first, can you give me what's a song? It's the end, wherever the point in the week when you're like, I'm gonna go home and I'm gonna sit down here and maybe I'm gonna crack a book, maybe I might have a beverage of some sort, but no one's gonna disturb me for the next 13 to 14 minutes or something, or it may be longer. Or I'm gonna start this record and I know, I'm gonna kind of close the chapter and move on to what my evening is gonna be. Like, what's something that you would want to put on to get that energy going?
I treated myself to an Echo, one of those little boxes, okay. the Alexa. And the beauty of it is that, now I can go back and ask it to play these songs from 1965. I mean, you know, to the 5 stair steps, and, you know, the 4 tops. I mean, and so I'm listening to, you know, I tell people it's like a trip down memory lane, but I'm kind of going back to, you know, my teen years and listening to music. And so, you know, recently it's The Last Poets and Gil Scott-Heron, but when I want to sort of sit and deeply sort of delve into some music, it's Wynton Marsalis' The Majesty of the Blues, which is, you know, instrumental and then a spoken word piece for the last 14 or 15 minutes, where they're speaking about just the evolution of blues and jazz and the spirituality associated with it, and the impact of Ellington and others, and just you know, it's sort of like, and I've been listening to it for 20 years, but each time I listen to it, there's something that I hear for the first time, or that it's punctuated in a way that it wasn't before, or that I can stay with. You know, it's sort of like when I listen each year, I find a quiet space, and I have a 33 and a third album with Dr. King's speech, and I listen to it. And you know, it's one thing when you're in a crowd of people and you can sort of go along, but when you literally just sit down and listen to the crowd, to the words, to his intonation, and you can kind of close your eyes and sort of transport yourself. And I remember where I was. You know, I was 13 years old when that speech was given. I like to sort of continue to have it be both familiar and different at the same time. Mm-hmm. I mean, you know, I know it, but I don't know it. I heard it, but I'm hearing it differently. But The Majesty of the Blues, but Wynton Marsalis.
I'd like to check it out. I haven't heard it.
Yeah,
All right.
yeah.
All right, I'm going to get one more, and then we're going to pull out. So, I'm at least, I've always been like, certain things I like to listen to in the morning. Right? You know, when I was in high school was when I'm, you know, getting dressed and, you know, like getting ready to go try to do whatever I'm going to do today, or be fly, so to speak, or go try to talk to that girl today. You know, those sorts of things. And then at other points in life, it's been either, you know, I'm going to be up way too late, but I'm going to wake up because I got to go to work and go do whatever I got to do, or I got to go to class, you know, especially when I started taking class seriously. Not, you know, that's a kind of more complicated story. However, so at all times I have different, you know, morning songs. You know, while I'm eating breakfast, or, you know, getting my bag together to leave. Do you have any kind of morning songs? And if you do, you know, what would be something that would be in that, you know, playlist or that rotation? You know,
it's interesting. I grew up in a house where my father listened to talk radio all the time.
Oh, wow. Like 10 Winds and
well, it was actually WNEW, and I can't remember the call letters, but it was John Gambling. It was the show. Okay. WOR in New York City. And you know, I used to sit there and mumble and grumble. Oh, you listen to this, you know, and you know, I'm my father. I listen to talk radio
all morning,
and NPR. I mean, public radio I've listened to for the last 30 years. Wherever I've been in, I left Philadelphia probably in 1975, and I've been to 7 other cities since then, with Portland being the 7th. And whenever I've moved, I've found the public radio station. So I'm a public radio junkie. So I mean, the minute it goes on, I'm listening to All Things Considered, or, you know, I just you know, it's my primary source, kind of for views of the world. And oddly enough, you know, sometimes, you know, people have been very, very kind here. I mean, I love this city, and I've just been treated so well. But every once in a while, people will say, hey, you know, can we have coffee? And I say, sure. And I meet them down at a little place along the river called the Little River Cafe. It's between McCormick's and Smith and the River Place Hotel. It's just a little place right on the waterfront. And I like to meet him there because I live in Southeast, and I get on the Springwater Corridor, and I ride my bicycle. So I get up in the morning, I put my little flashing lights on because it's usually pretty dark if I've got like a 7:30 or 8 o'clock coffee. Yeah. And I ride in. And if it's raining, it's raining. If it's not, it's not. But on the way in, I have to listen to NPR. On the way back, I got my iPod, and I'm listening to all my songs from the 70s and the 80s and Motown and Teddy Pendergrass and the Temptations and Grover Washington and others. So it's funny. The first thing in the morning is not music. Now, if my wife is with me, it's music. And it's usually, she's the generation below. She's a little younger, so she's into much more contemporary type music than I am. But yeah. So talk to me when I first wake up, and then you can sing to me on the way home.
I like that. That's me. Well, it's been a pleasure.
Oh, this has been fun, man. Thank you. I feel privileged.
Thank you, and I appreciate you adding on and sharing. And we will see each other often.
Oh, for sure. For sure. We had a lot of rooms together.
Indeed. So this has been the Ask Your Old Head podcast with Justice Raji and my guest, Michael Alexander. Thank you, Michael.
Thank you.
All right. Peace.